So, Heaven by Mieko Kawakami. Still trying to get used to those Japanese names. Mieko, I think Mieko Kawakami. I'm more comfortable. Have more confidence with the last name than I do the first. Mieko is a little bit tricky, at least for me. But yeah, it is a 2009 novel. And the more I do these kinds of videos, kind of the less I care about specific little facts, like, oh, it was a 2000. I mean, you can look them up by yourself, but I figured I'd just like to give a little background about it. But I guess it's like, it does kind of make some bit of difference when you're like talking about a book that came out like in like the early 1900s or something, or yeah, there's definitely some context helps out with the trying to get the hang of where the book is and like time wise, history too. But yeah, so this is a novel, kind of a coming of age story. I think it's quite dark. It gets pretty dark. It like addresses bullying, but not in like a kind of sappy kind of maudlin kind of way of like the like good versus evil kind of morality tale. I mean, it is in a sense it's a morality tale, but it's also has a lot to say about like kind of immoral, or rather amorality, I guess, or people who kind of transcend any kind of ethics whatsoever. And the novel concerns a young man, not young man, but a young boy, pretty much. He's 14 years old, or maybe 13 or 14, and it takes place in the 90s. And the novel is kind of vague about, at least that's a sense I got, that it doesn't really, Kawakami doesn't really just explain exactly when it takes place. She says like there's sometime in like by the end of like 1999, we'd be graduated, or like certain things like that. She'll like drop a few there, but we do understand that it's somewhere in the 90s. So and he's a young man, a young boy, 14 years old, and he's basically it's like a cusp of teenager, and cusp of entering into that kind of really confusing, messy kind of time in your life when it's really hard to discern and like how to take care of yourself, like what to do, like everything is really confusing. And he's basically, you don't get his name at all throughout this. He's called Eyes because he has a lazy eye. I think the medical term is strabismus, when you have like an eye that's like one that's like offset from the other. And he has, I think it's pretty bad for him in that so many people, bullies, especially these two other, I don't know if they're older than him or if they're just bigger, but they're definitely bigger than him, and they inflict the worst kind of bullying on him imaginable. I mean, he is like it only gets worse from there. Like if you're like halfway through the novel and it's like, oh, this isn't a criticism at all, it's actually I think it's a good thing that she's showing shining a light into the horrible way they treat him. But it's like like I said, like even if you're like halfway through the novel, it's like it's not going to get better from there. So yeah, he only finds solace in the fact that there's one other a girl his age named Kojima, who's a very bright a student who's they go to the same school, and they call her Hazmat because she also has a similar thing where she's basically disgraced for being like unkempt and kind of unhygienic, and they call her they basically like equate her to being like kind of a dog, and so they bond over this kind of thing where they're both bullied and they're both like kicked away and shoved to the sidelines. And a lot of the times there's a a sense that that there's like a romance between them, but it's confusing. It's like that childlike rather. Some of it's like a childlike, quite pure and innocent on one hand. It's like he never wants to, like, it addresses like kind of the simple woes that you go through when you're like a kid, that I can definitely identify remembering and relating to, having these issues of like like the lustfulness or hormones and all these awful, like, really messy things that happen when you're a kid, and like the feeling that if you thought about somebody in an impure way, like you'd never want to do that to somebody that you actually truly love. And it's like this thing that like, and considering that the author is a female, that's quite interesting, because writing from the point of view, right directly from the point of view first person too, is pretty, it's pretty what's the word I'm looking for? Impressive that she was able to address this kind of inner psyche, I guess, of like what's going on for a like a boy on the cusp of puberty. Like it's like, so it's a very specific time in your life, and I know that it was that's probably the most like very confusing probably time in my life when things were just up in the air and nothing made sense. And to add to that, the bullying, luckily I never had to go through like that kind of thing, like that level. I mean, I'm sure most of us to some extent, even like with just how how awful, like with the addition of cyber, like bullying too, if you add to that, which because the novel takes place in the 90s, obviously that wasn't much of a problem then, aside from probably like some email chains or whatever. But I don't think anybody really had accessible like that much. I don't think the internet was like that readily available to everybody. So there's like a lot of it was a lot of face-to-face type of bullying. That there's these two other I think it's Mimosa and then there's another two of them that kind of in lieu, like one of them serves as his assistant, and they're both like really pessimistic. I believe Kawakami referenced Thus Spake Zarathustra kind of as a influence on her website. She's I think she mentions like Nietzsche as being kind of a influence for Mimosa, I think his name was, and how like he achieves power and how he gets power and how he doesn't have any, like there's like these long monologues where you hear him and he like sounds like so eerily like logical about what he's doing, like all these inhuman things, like stapling eyes, his poor kid stapling his hands to like different, to a I forget what it was, like to the desk, I think, and like doing things like using his head as a volleyball, like kicking his head, just these awful horrible things. And like the way he's just like coolly just kind of like, yeah, I do this because in so many words says like I do this because there's no reason not to, like why not, like nobody's stopping me, nobody's like, people think like all these there's such a thing as good and evil, like there's such thing as like a axiomatic, he doesn't say axiomatic, but obviously because he's like a 14-year-old, but like he says like, because people think there's like a black and white morality, like that you should follow rules and all these things that we do, like conduct and being dignified and not wanting to offend anybody. I don't think like he thinks those are all just missed, like they're basically fluff, like it's just stuff. Kind of reminds me of like Max Stirner a little bit, like Spooks, like it sounds like a little bit Spooks, although obviously I don't think Stirner's, he took it to the effect of like, oh yeah, just do whatever you want because of that. It was more like a descriptive, now I'm getting into philosophy, more of a descriptive kind of ideology, not even ideology, but just kind of like, I think it was called rational egotism, in the sense just like pursue what you want, do what you want, because all these things of like state, like for example, this is why I think he was like around the time of Hegel, he was like there's like the right and the left Hegelians, and I think he was a left Hegelian, but I think he kind of just ended up even from there branching out and doing his even more kind of off unique kind of thing. And I don't necessarily agree with him. I mean but in the sense that everything we have, like state, God, power, ordained church or whatever, like all these things are just spooks, as he said, like kind of just ghostly specters in the mind, I think is the way he puts it. And yeah, it's kind of sounds like pretty much what Mimosa I think is saying, is that there's literally no point to anything, and I'm just gonna keep doing this thing, and you either defend yourself and you get your power. It's like almost sounds like childish in a way, like in it's like throwing a temper tantrum. There's some people that we get that's eked out of like that you think that happens to, and it's like I think the monstrous kind of thing is the fact that maybe there are kids that just it doesn't work with. Like there's something a little bit off with these kids, and maybe this definitely goes into a bit of the is it a biological is a way like is he a bully simply because of the way he was raised, the hand he was dealt with, or you don't really get the full scope into his origins, but like it's definitely you kind of get this idea that Eyes is just thrust into this thing like I think at some one point people say like the reason they him and Kojima are bullied is just because we're there, we happen to be in the same place at the same time occupying this same little tiny little a scrap of land as the rest of these people, and we have to every day he has to face this stuff. So at one point he decides to finally confront him, and there's a big culmination that happens and I want to say it's like kind of like the final act of the story when him and Kojima, and the reason it's called Heaven, the titular kind of Heaven is a painting that they both visit at this art museum, and they both bond over this in a very innocent way. They bond over this image of like it's called Heaven, but they actually both never get the time to see it because it's like the way it describes it, it's like quite beautiful, like the way Kojima describes Heaven being like this. It's like both like the way like the strokes and brush strokes of somebody's like the most beautifying, the most venerating things, but also a little bit of the like the storm and the kind of tumultuous kind of off-kilter aspects of reality that are harsher and more chaotic, but are necessary to finally having beauty, like for being able to appreciate beauty. This like classic kind of seasons of like losing oneself and like chaos are actually quite necessary and actually more conducive in a way to like like appreciating beauty in its fullest extent. So like that's what she describes Heaven as this painting, and they both never get to see it, and that's kind of like I think it's indicative of the overall theme of them never because spoiler alert, like they actually never see each other again after the accident. What happens with and I think that Heaven was like a kind of stand-in type of name of like this thing that they never got to see, like it's like the reflection or the expression or the embodiment of everything that they never got to experience together, like because of this bullying was so bad. So, and I really hope that this is just fiction, because at the end of the day it is like hyper fiction in a way, because it's like stuff that could happen, and I've never been to Japan. I don't know exactly. I don't want to sound like I'm stereotyping, but I think there is a little bit of something to Japan with the hierarchies are perhaps more stringent, I believe. I think there's more of like if you don't make it to the certain level, like you're not good enough, or in certain aspects of it. Not all of Japan has, I'm not speaking for all of them, but I think there's like a little bit more of that kind of pressure of like status. Excuse me. But I think mostly that the kind of bullying, I think, is more so like a almost heightened kind of version of what you might experience in real life, and yeah, and you can only hope that it's like fiction, because it's like it would be so awful if something like this, anything close to this, was happening in real life. But yeah, there's so he finally Kojima and Eyes finally face off against him in the end in this kind of denouement, and they it's this very it's almost like a little bit rough, at least for me. I think I mentioned that I have a bit of more of a light stomach, being able to do certain things like this, and kind of like in that sense, like I think Haruki Murakami also, some of his stuff is like has a bit of that, and he actually said that Kawakami was one of his favorite like younger authors, I believe, and they actually had an interview that I've yet to have listened to, but I definitely would like to some of these days. But yeah, so it is a little bit tough to get through. to endure all that, like the graphic kind of things, like what they do to him. They basically like put him in a tub, and they force Eyes to like him and Kojima to like do something like well, you clearly have feelings for her, so like like basically have sex in front of us in this kind of sadomastic kind of thing that Mosi and him, the rest of the bullies have this. And it's mainly like this one bully that kind of like is like he's handsome and more popular, and he's able to kind of lease the rest of this horrible stuff that he does. As like he kind of makes other people do the dirty work in a way. Sometimes I get the sense, but because he has like people that kind of like stand and like ready to basically do his bidding, because he's able to kind of manipulate them into doing. He's very manipulative, and he's able to get people to do his will. But he does, he clearly like he wants. There's like a sadomachistic kind of thing where he's like I think he just gets off on the idea of power. I think it's not even like. It's more so he just like, you have to do it. I'm a perfectionist or something. He says that. And he's like, you have to like go the full. You have to fully do what I say. Otherwise, like you're in for the hell. And then finally, I think Eyes is able to summon up the courage and the wherewithal, the kind of energy to get this rock, and basically I think tries to attack him with it, but I think he kind of fails. And then on this moment in the rain, it's like everything's messy. This is outside now. I'm thinking in the rain, out kind of like where nobody can really get a sense of what's going on. Kojima just goes like folding into this like laughing fit, and then she's like, so like everything like she was feeling like because she was like before that she was like very passive, and she and Eyes describes her as having like a very kind of like blank kind of almost like inert stare, like she's like lifeless, I think. And finally she just out of nowhere is just like completely emphatically just like radical amounts of energy. She just like laughs in this fit, like kind of a laughing. In that sense, like maybe that's where I see more of the Spake Zarathustra, in the sense that at the end of like the snake that I believe that Zarathustra tells this other man that's like choking on a snake, and he tells him like, bite off the head and then you'll start laughing. Or I think like bite off the head and then the man starts laughing instead, in accepting all of life. And I think that's kind of what happens with her, is that she's like basically like, instead of like turning on them and being violent and just like, and basically just, it's like a instead of an alternating kind of, what's the term? Like the kind of socio kind of term of like the alternating bigotry kind of thing. Like instead of that, like just like rather than using their fighting fire with a fire, to put it kind of blandly, just basically accept this kind of thing. And if it's a bit of a amor fati, it's like embracing one's fate, but not without kind of inserting your own kind of will into there, and your own authenticity, your own kind of existential kind of whatever, everything you stand for, your dignity and everything, is like you hold on to that. And she's like, that's what she does when she like completely just like goes off laughing, like that. And eventually they're all scared away, and then which I thought was a little bit kind of almost within the realm of almost like magically a little bit kind of like out there a bit, just in the sense that everybody kind of ran away from that. But at the same time, I think it was always meant to be kind of a heightened kind of thing, like not, I mean, there's not like straight up like real like kind of magic realism. There's no like witches and brooms, there's there's nobody like coming in, like there's no Deus Ex Machina kind of coming in to save the day. But I think in a sense, in the very same sense that I think it's kind of on par for the heightened realism that's been happening so far. And then eventually, too, to add to that, there's one of the adults finds them and kind of like scurries, the boys away, and and that's the last time that Eyes sees Kojima, and they end the story, and he I think he kind of resolves in a to finally kind of start taking more accountability. I think just to finally start like like he had mentioned getting eye surgery earlier, and then he mentions that to his mother, and then he finally kind of says all this to his mother too. And I should have also mentioned the point too that there's another point that they bond on, which is that I think Eyes is being raised by a single parent, and then Kojima too is I think has a new stepfather that she doesn't like, and she, her father, that her mother divorced her father, and kind of like basically doesn't let her see him anymore, and she basically loves her father very much. So there's that kind of thing that they bond over too, is like that parenthood is another point I think I should have brought up earlier. But yeah, this that's where it ends. Is like Eyes finally kind of decides to get. I believe it kind of he does decide to get the eye surgery, and because he was also, Kojima also said that those eyes made him who he was in a way too. So it's kind of left up in the air a little bit, but I think finally he's able to. He goes to a different school. He tells his mother about all the bullying, and then finally he's transferred to a different school, and he kind of has to start over again. So yeah, Heaven by Mieko Kawakami, definitely recommend it. Just some heads up about, I probably should have put some trigger words. There are some parts of it that might get a little bit rough to read. But yeah, I definitely want to start reading more of her. I think I recently bought Breast and Eggs. I think it's on the way. It's literally on its way in the mail. So eventually I'm going to try to read that next. But I might want to do. I like to do a little bit of thing where I take a break between some authors. Like I take a little bit of a break. And since like I had such like a huge ultimatum of reading last year, making it like I had to read 150 books or whatever. Like it doesn't have to be. I'm just trying to kind of take a little bit. I'm trying to I'm on the come down of that kind of intense kind of thing of like reading all the time. So I'm gonna try to appreciate longer books now. So anyway, so yeah, thanks for watching.